Hello everyone and welcome to another video on JavaScript programming. Kaushal this side from SimpliCode, and today we are going to discuss how to take users input in JavaScript. So we'll be using text boxes, radio buttons and select boxes for taking users input, and we'll see how to use these HTML tags to take users input along with JavaScript. So before we begin, make sure that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel and press that bell icon to never miss an update from SimpliCode. So without any further delay, let's get started. Today we are going to take input from the user with the help of a text box in JavaScript. What we'll do is we'll create a text box, and any value the user will write inside the text box will be stored in a variable, and then we will print that variable in a message using the alert method or in the console. So whatever we want to do, we can do it. So let's create a small login page with no styling because we'll be focusing more on the HTML and the JavaScript parts. So for that we have to go to our HTML file. So here's a HTML file, and we'll write here input, and then we'll write here type is equals to name, and then we'll write here placeholder is equals to, let's say, enter name. This placeholder is an attribute that gives a slight hint. Whatever value we write here will be printed inside the box. So this enter name will be printed inside this particular text box. So save it, and here you can see on the browser we have a text box here. Here you can see how this value is written inside the text box. You can see here enter name is written inside a text box, indicating the user to write the name here. So let's create another text box here for the password. So we are creating a login page, right? So we'll be needing name and password. So we'll use the br tag here, and then we'll write here input type is equals to password, and then we'll use a placeholder here and we'll write here enter password. This type attribute here plays a vital role on this input element because we have different types of values we can use inside a text box, like we have numbers, strings, week, time, email, password and many more. So here we are using password. So save it, and you can see here we have two text boxes over here in the browser. So we have a text box for name and we have a text box for password. Next up, we need a button to perform a task, right? So we'll use the onClick method along with this button. We can either use the button tag or we can use the input tag along with type is equals to button. So we'll write here input type is equals to button, and the value will be, say, submit, or we can write here login as well. Save it, and here you can see we have a button over here named as submit. So we are done with the login setup here. We have a text box for the name and one for the password. So we'll write any name here. You can see, let's write here Kaushal, and then we'll write the password here, let's say any random password, and nothing will happen if we click on this submit button. So let's add some functionality to this submit button here. So we'll go back to our HTML file and we'll write here on click. So we'll write here a function name print. Fine. We'll create this print function now. So we'll go to our JavaScript file and we'll create a function here. So let's say function name is print, and then we have the body of the function. Now this function will be called whenever we click on this button. So whenever we click on this submit button, this print function will be called. Now we want this button to do something, right? We want it to perform a certain task. What we want to do is we want the user to write their name and password, and we will print this name and password in the pop-up with the help of alert method. So we'll use the document.getElementById method for this task. Let's give those elements their IDs. So we'll give these two input tags their IDs. So we'll write here ID is equals to, let's say, uname or username, and then we have the password. For password we'll give the ID as upass. Fine, save it, and then we'll go back to our JavaScript file. Now both these elements have their own IDs. We'll use them in the JavaScript file. So we want to use the values given by the user, right? for that, we'll create two variables here inside the function print to hold the reference of original values. So for that, we'll write here where x is equals to document.getElementById, and then we have the id as uname for the username, and then we'll write here dot value. Next up, we'll take another variable, let's say var y, and then we'll write here document.getElementById again. Then we have the id as upass. We'll write here dot value. Now, what we did here is we used the IDs to get the reference of those values which the user will input. You might have noticed here that we have used the value property here after the IDs. So this value property returns the value attribute of any text box. So now we have the values here present inside variables x and variable y. The next thing we want to do is we want to print these values, right? So for that, we'll use the alert method. So it's quite easy to use. We'll write here alert, and then we'll write here the name is, and then we'll print x. So because variable x is holding the value of name, then we'll use /n, and after that we'll write here the password is, and then we'll print the value of password. So we are done with it. We have printed the values of x and y here. Now save it, and now we'll enter the values here. Let's say the name is Kaushal and the password is SimpliCode. The moment we click on this submit button, there will be a pop-up with a message. You can see it here. The name is Kaushal and the password is SimpliCode. So we printed these variables here along with the alert method. So this is how we can take input from the user in JavaScript. So we already discussed that we want to create a login form here with a specific name or password, right? Let's say we want the user to be allowed only if the password is SimpliCode. Otherwise, the user should be restricted from entering the web page. So this is a simple task. All we have to do here is we have to use the if-else control statements. So for that, we'll write here after this statement, we'll write here if, and then we'll write here, let's say we are doing it for password, right? So we'll write here y is equals to SimpliCode. Then we have the body of if, we'll write here alert login successful, and then we'll write here else. The statement will be alert wrong password. So we'll keep this line here. So what will happen is the moment we'll press the submit button, it will go to the if else statement and it will check if the password entered by the user matches the correct password or not. So if the password matches, it will print login successful. Otherwise, it will print the wrong password. And then finally, it will print the name entered by the user and the password as well. So let's save it, and we'll write here the name as, let's say, Kaushal. And the password, let's say the password will be different this time. We'll write here Simplilearn. So this password does not matches the original password, right? The original password is SimpliCode. So what we are expecting is it will return wrong password here. So let's save it. The moment we press the submit button, you can see here we have a pop-up with message wrong password because the password we entered is Simplilearn. So if we press OK here, in the next message you can see the name is Kaushal and the password is Simplilearn. Fine. So let's do it again. This time we'll enter the correct password. We'll write here SimpliCode and we'll change the name as well. So let's say the name is Rahul. Submit it, and here you can see we have the message as login successful. We'll press OK, and here you can see the name is Rahul and the password is SimpliCode. In this tutorial, we will see how we can use radio buttons to take input from users. Now, HTML radio buttons are created with the help of input tags, and the type for creating radio buttons is radio. We can use radio buttons on multiple occasions. For example, we can create a quiz question using a radio button. At one time only a single radio button will be selected and we can use it to find the correct answer. So today we will use radio buttons along with the ID attribute, and then we will create a JavaScript function to find the correct answer for a quiz. So without wasting any time, let's move on to the programming part. So first we will see how to add radio buttons to a HTML document. In the HTML file we will write here input type is equals to radio, and then we have value is equals to, let's say, option 1, because we are using multiple options, right? We have multiple options for a single question, or we have multiple options here. So we'll write value as option 1, and then we'll write here the value we want to print. So we'll write here option 1. Fine. Save it, and we have a radio button over here. You can see we can check it and it has no functionality till now. So let's add another button first. So what we'll do, we'll copy this line from here and we'll paste it, and then we'll change the option as option 2 and the value also as option 2. Right. Save it again, and here you can see we have 2 radio buttons now. Let's add a submit button here first. So we'll write here input type is equals to button, and then we have value is equal to submit. Save it, and here you can see we have a submit button as well. One thing you might notice here is we can check both the text boxes, right? We can check option 1 and option 2 both at the same time. So if we want to select only one checkbox at a time, we have to group them. So we'll use the name attribute and the same name for these 2 radio buttons. So the name will remain the same for both of these radio buttons. So we'll write here name is equals to, let's say, G1, and then we'll write here as well, we'll write here name is equals to G1. Now these 2 radio buttons belong to the same group. Save it, and now if you try to check both these boxes, you can see we can't do it now because we have grouped them, and now we can select only one radio button at a time, right? Now the next thing we are going to do is we'll move to a JavaScript file and we'll create a function there. So we'll move to a JavaScript file. So here's our JavaScript file and we'll create a function here. So let's do it first. So we'll write here function. Let's say the function name is fun1. Fine. And then we have the body of this function. So inside this function we'll write here, we'll take 2 variables again for both the elements. So we'll write here var x, and then we'll write here document.getElementById. Then we'll write here the ID. So let's provide the ID to those elements as well. So we'll write here before name we'll provide the ID. So let's say the ID for the first radio button is red1, and the ID for the second one will be, let's say, red2. Fine. Save it, and we'll go back to our JavaScript file. We'll write here red1, and then we'll take another variable. We'll write here where y is equals to document.getElementById method, and then we'll write here the ID. So the ID for the second radio button is red2. Fine. We don't need the value property here. Next up, we have to use the if else statement to print something, right? So we'll write here, we'll use the if else statement. We'll write here if, and then we have x dot checked is equals to true, then it will return something, right? So we have a condition here as if x dot checked is equals to true. This particular statement will check if the radio button whose reference is available at variable x is selected or not. This dot checked is the property for a HTML element. If the radio button is checked, the output will be something. So let's add the output here as well. So the output will be, if the radio button is checked, will be like, we'll write here alert, then we'll write here the option selected is, then we will write here x dot value. So it will print the value of x as well. Now we have another condition here. We'll write here if y.checked is equals to true, then it will return the option selected is, we'll write here plus y.value. We are doing this because we have three different conditions here, right? If we select option 1, or if we select option 2, or if we are not selecting any of these options, right? So we have a else condition for that, and then we'll write here else. So here we have to write else if, and then we'll write here else, and the else part will print alert no option selected. Save it, and let's do one thing first. We'll call this function with the help of onClick method. So we'll go back to our HTML file, and we'll write here in this element, we'll write here onClick, and we'll call this function onClick. So we'll write here fun1, and we have this function here. Save it, and here we are good to go. So if we move back to our JavaScript file, you can see here we have three conditions: either x is checked, or y is checked, or none of these are checked. So let's check the output now. We'll select option 1 first, we'll submit it, and here you can see we have the output as the option selected is option 1. Fine. Press OK, then we'll refresh this page and we'll select option 2, and now we'll press the submit button. So here you can see on selecting option 2, we have the output here as the option selected is option 2, right? So what if we are not selecting any of these two radio buttons? So click the submit button here, and you can see we have the output as no option selected. So I hope you guys got it. Now the syntax will remain the same if we want to create a quiz. So next up, what we are going to do is we are going to create a quiz. So here is the code if you want to create a quiz on your own. So we have a question here. We have a question as JavaScript was developed in the year, and then we have two options for it. We have 1998 as first option. So if we go here, you can see we have the first option is 1998, and then we have another option is 1995. Obviously we know the answer for it as 1995. We'll change the function name here as fun1 and save it. The JavaScript file for this code will look like this. So we have three conditions here again. If x is checked, then the output will be wrong answer, and the correct answer is y. And then we have another condition for y. If y is checked, or we can say if 1995 is checked, we'll have the output as right answer. And then we have another condition: if none of these radio buttons are checked, we have the output as no option selected. So let's see if the code works fine. So save it, and we'll go to the browser. So we'll select option 1 first. So we'll select this 1998, submit it, and here you can see we have the output as wrong answer. The correct answer is 1995, right? We have the value of y here. The value variable y is holding is 1995. So we printed it over here, and we have the output as y.value, which is 1990. So if we refresh it and if we select 1995 here, then we'll press the submit button, and here you can see we have the output as right answer. Fine. Press OK, and we are going to do it again. So this time we won't be selecting any of these options. We'll just click on this submit button, and we have the output as no option selected. Fine. I hope you guys understood it. In the last few videos, we discussed the same thing, right? We saw how we could take input using text boxes, and then we saw how we can take input using radio buttons. Today we are going to grab users input with the help of a select box in JavaScript. So without wasting any time, let's move on to the programming part directly. First, we'll see how to create a select box in HTML, and then we'll move on to the JavaScript part. So let's move on to HTML, and we'll create a select box here. If you guys remember, we used the input tag in the previous few videos for text boxes and radio buttons. But for the select box, the scenario is a bit different. We have to use the select element in HTML. So we'll write here select. So we have the select element here. We have to use this for select box in JavaScript or in HTML. So this select box is used to create a drop down list of some elements. So we can add as many elements as we want to that list. So we'll use the option tag for each component we are going to use. So the code goes like this. We'll start with the select tag and let's save this and see if it makes any changes to a browser. So you can see it on the browser that we have a button over here. Now we'll add options to this drop down list. For that we'll use the option tag. We'll write here option. And let's say we have three options. We have three car manufacturers name. So let's say the first name is BMW. Then we'll copy this statement and we'll paste it again and again, and then we'll change the name of manufacturers. So let's say another manufacturer is Audi and the last one is Ford. Fine. We have three manufacturers now. Save it and you can see it over here. We have a drop down list of three different elements. We have BMW, Audi and Ford here. Next up, we'll add a button. So a submit button as we did in the previous few videos. For that we will write here input type is equals to button and then we have value is equals to submit. Fine. Save it and we'll use a BR tag here. Save it now, and here you can see we have a drop down list here, we have a select box here, and then we have a submit button over here. Fine. Now we want to print the option we selected by clicking this submit button. For that we have to add functionality to our HTML document, right? So we'll follow the same steps as we did in the last video wherein we used the radio buttons and the text boxes. So we'll write here inside this input tag, we'll write here on click. So what we want to do is we want to call a function on clicking a submit button, right? So we'll write here a function name. So let's say the function name is selected and we have to use the ID attribute in the select element, right? So we'll use the ID attribute here. We are not going to use a ID attribute inside the option tags, but we are going to use the ID attribute inside the select tag. So we'll write here ID is equals to, let's say, 1. Fine. So we have an ID here. Now we have to use the value property here as well. So I hope you guys remember the value property which we discussed in previous videos. So the value property is used to access these values, right? So we'll write here value is equals to BMW, and then for Audi the value will be Audi, and then for Ford the value will be Ford. Fine. Save it, and here we are done with the HTML document. So next up we'll create a function in the JavaScript file. So let's move on to the JavaScript file and we'll create a function over here. So we'll write here function and the function name is selected. Then we have the body of this function, right? So we are going to repeat the same steps. We are going to take a variable x which will hold the reference of select statement. So we'll write here document.getElementById and then we'll write here the ID. So the ID is 1. So now we have a variable x which holds the reference value of select element, right? Now we have used the document.getElementById method to get the reference of the selected value. Next up, we'll use some properties for select element while printing the value with alert method. So if you guys remember in the previous video wherein we used the .checked property for radio buttons. So similarly we have some more properties here for the select boxes as well. So let's have a look at them. So we'll write here alert, and then we have a property which will go like this. We'll write here x dot options, and then we have this brackets and dot value. So this options property here is a collection of all the options we have in our select tag. We have multiple options, right? This property works on arrays. So we have an array of all the elements and we can access any of them. For that we will write here the index value, right? So let's say the index value is 0. We want to print the element present at number 1. So we'll save it, and the moment we press submit button, you can see here we have the output as BMW. Now, one thing to notice here is it doesn't matter which option the user chooses, the output will remain BMW for all those cases because we are using the first element of the array. So no matter which option the user is selecting, the message will be there with the value present at index 0. So we can say now that we can't use static values, right? We can't use 0, 1 or 2 here because we want to provide the value dynamically, because we have 3 different values here and we want to print the value which the user selected, not the one present at index 0, 1 or 2. So for that we have another property here. We have to write here x dot selected index, and one thing you have to remember is we have to write here x dot selected index or any variable we are using here. So we are good to go now. Save it. And if we press submit now while clicking on BMW, so our first option is BMW, let's press the submit button and here you can see we have the output as BMW. And next up we'll be selecting Audi and we'll press submit. So here you can see we have the output as Audi now. And finally we have Ford as well, so let's check it as well. So press the submit button and here you can see we have the output as Ford. So this is how we can take inputs in JavaScript from drop-down lists. Next up, we'll go through a simple program as we did in the last video, wherein we'll create a quiz question and we'll check if the option selected by the user is correct or not. So this is the code for that. So we have the question here as JavaScript was developed by. We are using another question different from the one we used in the last video. So we know who developed JavaScript, right? So we have a question here, JavaScript was developed by, and then we have 2 options for the same question. The first one is Brendan Eich and the second one is Guido van Rossum. So then we have the ID as 1 for the select element and the values are also the same. Then we have a button over here which will call function 1 on clicking. And if we move to a JavaScript file, we can see here we have a function fun1 and then we have a variable x which holds the reference of value returned by document.getElementById method. And then we use this value. So we have used here x.options. So what we are doing is we are basically checking that if the selected value is equals to Brendan Eich or not. If the value is equal to Brendan Eich, then the output will be the answer is correct. Else the output will be the answer is wrong. So let's save it and we'll move back to our HTML file and we'll save this file as well. So now here you can see we have a question over here and we have a select box which has 2 options, Brendan Eich and Guido van Rossum, right? So let's select Brendan Eich first, press the submit button and here you can see it says the answer is correct. Fine. Next up we are going to use Guido van Rossum and we are going to press submit button. So here you can see the answer is wrong. So that's all for this video guys. I hope you guys got it. If you liked this video, do give it a thumbs up. If you have any doubts, do let us know in the comments, share it with your friends and don't forget to subscribe SimpliCode. Thank you.